camera, so I want to be on a microphone too. I'd like to introduce Karsten Anderson, our superintendent of the last 8 years. Karsten has a background as a business manager and obviously a superintendent in, 10 years in Watertown Mayor before you came here. So Karsten has a presentation for the audience. Again, I encourage you to write questions on those index cards we've given you. And then there will be some time for questions and answers. So again, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Heidi, and also thank you to the League of Women Voters and AAUW for hosting tonight's event. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk to the public about a really important vote for the school district and community on November 6th. I'm thrilled to be here to share our story. And as Heidi mentioned, we would love to have challenging questions that you can submit now so that at the end of the presentation I can have a chance to answer those questions. So please, if you have questions yourself or if you've heard questions from others, please submit those forms so we can tackle those important issues too. Before I get into the discussion about the educational plan and our operating levy referendum, I'd like to just introduce myself really quickly. As Heidi said, I'm Karsten Anderson, Superintendent of Schools. I was born and raised in Montana, but I chose to study, live, work, and eventually retire here in Minnesota. This is my 8th year as superintendent in Red Wing, and my 21st year as a superintendent in the state of Minnesota. I've been in Clinton, Graceville, Beardsley, out in the western part of the state, Watertown Mayor, and finally, my favorite place, of course, is Red Wing, Minnesota. I have 3 boys who live with their mom in Watertown, Minnesota, which is about 2 hours away. They love coming to Red Wing. And each year I ask them, do you want Dad to move closer to home? Each year they say no. So at first, when they said no, I'd be kind of heartbroken a little bit. And then I realized, they just love coming to Red Wing. They love walking downtown, eating donuts and scones, climbing the bluff, and everything else. So I truly do love living and working in this beautiful city. One thing I do need to acknowledge, though, is that I'm a very dry presenter. It's kind of part of my personality, and so I hope I don't put you to sleep during the next 35 or 40 minutes or so. I'll do my best not to. I will say, though, that my personality does change, like when I'm at a Vikings game. It's like I completely change. I'm yelling all the time, and I'm excitable. But other than that, I'm really dry. And, at first I used to feel guilty about that. But then I realized, I'm not here to entertain. I'm here to inform. And on a night like this, it's to inform you about a really important topic that affects all of us for years to come. Before talking about the actual operating levy, I'd like to briefly review our educational plan that was approved unanimously by the school board just a few months ago. I'm really excited about this educational plan because I think it reflects and supports the community where we serve. The 3 phrases there really define the most important features of the educational plan. We want every child to be career ready, college ready, and life ready. Those are the 3 things that we want to keep on our mind at all times. And when I talk about being career ready, I mean regardless of the path that kids choose after high school. This means getting kids prepared so that they're ready for a position or a job right after high school or perhaps after they attend college. We want everyone to be ready for the workforce. I did, one of the handouts is a summary of our educational plan. It's one of the colored sheets here. It says Red Wing Public School Educational Plan. I'm not going to go over this in detail, but I would like to highlight a couple of points. You can read through the vision, the mission, the core values at your leisure. I'm going to focus on the first strategic direction. As I said, we want all of our kids to be career ready after high school or after college. And we've started to embark on a plan to help kids fulfill that. At the middle school and high school levels in particular, we're working on developing career areas throughout our curriculum. A career area might be something like manufacturing and engineering as one area, business, health and science, those kinds of broad areas where we want to focus on. Within each area, we will also be identifying different career pathways. So for example, in the manufacturing and engineering pathway, we may have something like machining or welding, perhaps architecture, those kinds of different pathways. Our goal, our intent, is to develop a curriculum and a series of learning activities that will help kids explore particular career pathways as they go through our system. Before I go too far, though, I do want to emphasize that we're not trying to track kids in a particular path. We don't expect kids to choose their path when they're entering 8th or 9th grade. That's not it at all. We just want to develop a sequence of classes so that people can explore areas and then perhaps go to a different career pathway as they get older to continue that exploration. A few key parts of this is that we intend to work with our community partners on developing those pathways, on developing the kinds of courses that we will offer in our high school based on what people here in Red Wing want and expect. So for example, the manufacturing engineering pathway would likely include somebody from Red Wing Shoe, perhaps 3M, a representative from Minnesota State College Southeast, as well as other business representatives, and of course people from the school district. This advisory group for that particular career area will help shape the kinds of offerings that we have in that area. We're not alone in Minnesota. Other school districts and communities have embarked on similar efforts. For example, Hutchinson and Alexandria, which are very similar to Red Wing, have robust programs. Now I say that, I know superintendents in both of those communities, and with all due respect, they do an unbelievably good job, but I honestly believe that we can even do it better here in Red Wing, because we have all the important pieces in place. We have a vibrant business community, manufacturing company, we have a strong arts presence, we have everyone we need at the table to do an even better job. A couple of other important focus points for the school district in the same line of thought is that we want to implement more hands-on, project-based learning throughout our curriculum, especially in the STEAM field. Now, STEAM stands for science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And when I think of Red Wing, I think that we are a vibrant STEAM community. You see it as you drive downtown, you see it in all the arts activities, you see it everywhere. And as I said earlier, our plan will help reflect and support those efforts. This year, for example, we reassigned 2 teachers at the elementary level to be STEAM specialists. We didn't add staff, we reassigned staff. And right now, all of our elementary students have the ability to rotate through a STEAM experience at the elementary level. It's a great program because all kids will have the chance to build, break, design, and code. We don't have enough of that in our school setting. We don't have that in Minnesota enough in an increasingly competitive world. We were piloting it last year, and one parent approached me and said how excited her daughters were because they'd always been great readers and they did great with the visual arts and those kinds of things, but really for the first time they had a chance to experience this hands-on learning where they could do those things like building and breaking and coding and designing. And that was a big deal for them, and now they're excited about the STEAM areas, and they may pursue something like that as they get older. At least we've exposed them to some meaningful learning. You can read through the rest of the strategic directions at your leisure. I just wanted to focus on those couple of items before we go any further. A year ago or so, we lost an operating levy, a referendum here in Red Wing. We had about 47% of the vote that said yes, and the others decided not to approve that plan. It was a good wake-up call for the school district. And we really took some time after that decision to really reflect on what we were proposing to the public and what we might do differently this time around. In a way, it was sort of a blessing in disguise, because I think we have a much stronger, much more coherent plan now than we did a year ago. We developed that plan for several reasons. First of all, we conducted interviews, small group focus groups, a community survey. We had lots of discussions at the board level and committee level about what was really important for our school district and community. That's how we ended up with this educational plan. And in June, that's what ended up with a unanimous vote to pursue a 2-question operating levy this November. Again, the educational plan and operating levy questions were both voted on unanimously by the school board, which has a lot of diverse opinions and perspectives and preferences, but we were able to get together and approve the plan unanimously. In a nutshell, these are the 2 questions. Question 1 would lead to an increased levy, but the primary purpose of question 1 is to maintain our existing programming and staffing as much as possible. Now, I've been a superintendent for 21 years. 16 or 17 of those years, I've had some sort of involvement with a budget reduction cycle. We understand that. That will continue into the future. But still, our purpose here is to maintain our existing programming and staffing as much as possible, realizing that we'll always have right-sizing decisions if our enrollment goes up or down. We have to make those decisions on a yearly basis. The focus of question 2 is to develop the career, college, and life readiness that I just briefly touched upon a few minutes ago. That would require an increased levy by $450 per student, but it would be earmarked towards those kinds of activities. Now, if I could take a step back for a minute, because I'm sure many of you are sitting there thinking, why do we need to increase our levy to maintain our existing programming and staffing? That's a question I might be asking if I was in your chair. There are several reasons why we need an increase in our operating levy referendum. First of all, we haven't had an increase in our voter-approved operating levy for 10 years. 2008 was the last time that we increased the voter-approved operating levy referendum. That's one of the factors. In particular, Red Wing has some particular cost pressures that a lot of other schools don't have. For example, our transportation costs have increased by several $100,000 over the last 10 years. And that's largely because of the geography of our area. We have the river, we have bluffs, we have long, winding roads through the rural areas that require more buses and therefore higher costs. We've also had only one bidder in terms of transportation the last time we went out for bids, and we're all competing for the same people who see the for wanted signs as they drive through town. So that drives up some of our costs. In addition, with transportation, we've had some higher special needs transportation costs as well. So that's a second factor. The third factor has to do with unreimbursed federal and state mandates. For example, we have more mandates now than we did 10 years ago in terms of teacher evaluations, student assessments, and special education expenses. By far, the biggest chunk of that additional unreimbursed cost would be through special education services. And I say that fully acknowledging that providing those services is the right thing to do. We will do it. We want to do it. But the simple fact is that we're not reimbursed from the state and federal governments for the mandates that we need to implement. So those are the three primary factors why we're asking for an increase in question 1. Two other points I want to bring out about the referendum effort. First of all, based on feedback that we had from numerous people, we opted for a 5-year operating levy instead of a maximum of 10 years. State of Minnesota allows us to go for a 10-year levy. We could have asked the voters again, but based on the feedback that we heard from people in this room and other folks, we decided to pursue a 5-year levy. I have to tell you, at first I was opposed to the shorter levy because I'm interested in the stability of funding. But I'll tell you what, when talking to people about that issue, I became convinced that it's the right thing to do for several reasons. First of all, we don't know what the state or local landscape will be 5 or 10 years from now. We just don't know. Also, it encourages us to be even more accountable to the public. So in 4 or 5 years, when we go out to the voters again, voters can decide if we've followed through with our promises this time around. Second part I'd like to highlight is that we could ask for an inflationary adjustment each year of the operating levy. This time around, again based on feedback that we heard from a lot of people, we decided not to include the inflationary factor. So again, over 10 years, we've had a flat voter-approved operating levy. We're asking voters to increase it this year, and then we will not increase it by the rate of inflation for another 4 or 5 years, until the next election or until there are some legislative changes, of course. This might be the most important slide in the presentation, but instead of going over the slide, which is on the screen there, I'd like you to take a look at this chart. It's an incredibly hard to read chart, and I'm sorry about that. As I've told some other groups, I'm even having a hard time reading it. I'm the one who wrote it. I have cataract surgery planned after the referendum, and so it's not particularly easy for me to read either. But I'd like to spend some time on this chart, because this really clearly defines the choices that we have on November 6th. First, though, I'm going to start with the third column on the first page. These are our promises, assuming questions 1 and 2 pass. Okay, so I'll start there. If you go down to the second row on the first page, College, Career, and Life Readiness Framework, you can see our promises with regard to implementing the STEAM curriculum and activities that I talked about earlier. Also talks about our allocations for adding curriculum and courses related to the career pathways that I also talked about earlier. Developing internships with our community partners and providing experiences so that our kids can have industry certifications before they leave from high school. That takes a little more explanation from me. As part of our career pathway plan, we plan to offer at least 10 industry certifications. So as kids go through the system, they can take these assessments, for example, in welding or marketing or as a certified nursing assistant. If they pass the assessment, then they get these certifications. We believe that our local businesses and manufacturers will greatly value knowing what skills our kids will bring to the table as they apply for jobs. Also, we're looking for greatly expanded internship opportunities with our partners. We started that somewhat this year with a youth skills training grant from the state, but we want to expand that and continue that into the future. So imagine you have a child going through our program, they have the sequence of courses, they can get an industry certification, and then have a real life working experience with some of the most reputable places in the world, like the SHU or 3M or Red Wing Arts, those kinds of programs that we offer right here in Red Wing. So we want to develop that to its fullest extent. Also want to point out the last bullet in that one section, a couple of examples. We need to update our vocational equipment. especially in the middle school and high school. And I'll give you one example. And I saw it for myself in person. John Jones and Doug Barlow were showing me around the shop area about a week ago, and they showed me this one piece of equipment that was built in 1937. 37. I couldn't believe it. And they pointed out, or they reminded me that the teachers in our school maintain the equipment, they repair the equipment, they've added the safety features to the equipment the best they can. They go onto eBay to order parts to make sure that this 1937 piece of equipment still works. And it does. We have 3 other pieces of equipment, however, that need to be replaced at some point. Those 3 pieces of equipment were obtained through Army surplus after they were on a battleship in the Korean War. I wasn't even born at that time, but we got it from Army surplus. With those pieces of equipment, according to John Jones, we're not able to buy the parts like we could 10, 20 years ago. And so, we need to replace those pieces of equipment, as well as continue to maintain our equipment and address other needs in our home economics department and other areas of the school district. You can see, obviously, we're also want to replenish our budgets for student computers and curriculum that we've had to cut back from time to time over the past few years. If you turn to the back side, there's more. We also realize that we need to make a commitment to provide the life resources for our students. You can see allocations for reading and math achievement, guidance counseling, mental health support, and other resources to manage student discipline and enhance student behavior. I want to point out that mental health support, that is the #1 concern or issue among many people in Goodhue County and across the state. Mental health support. We did receive a grant this year to provide 1 mental health worker in our school district of nearly 3,000 kids. Our needs are pre-K through 12 in this area, and we know that we need to do more to help our kids. So that's a quick summary of what we promised to do if both questions 1 and 2 pass. Middle column is a lot easier to go over because, as I said earlier, the primary focus, if just question 1 passes, is to maintain our existing programming and staffing. Now, we're not just going to sit there and do nothing. We're always looking at ways to innovate, on ways to save money, on ways to do things differently. But in essence, that's the purpose of question 1. I do need to go over in more detail what happens if question 1 does not pass. That's identified in column 1 on this chart. I'm going to go over this in great detail because I think it's critically important for residents and voters to understand the consequences of this levy referendum. Critically important. Our current levy expires after this school year. Without that levy, without an increase in the levy, we'll have to make some significant budget changes. Here are some of the things that we would likely do. Throughout this presentation, this part, I'll keep saying likely or potential. The reason for that is that the school board has not formally adopted a reduction plan. That would be decided after the election if question 1 does not pass. However, everything on this list would need to be addressed, or at least a version of it, in order to meet our budget. First of all, right now our projections show that we would need to eliminate somewhere between 20 and 30 teaching positions throughout the district. I calculated that by taking 1 teacher per grade, plus Tower View teachers, plus a lot of elective teachers in the middle school and high school. It'll be somewhere between 20 and 30. Obviously, that means higher class sizes, throughout the district. We estimate it's somewhere between 3 and 5 kids more per class, again, throughout the district. Here's the other part, though. that maybe isn't quite so readily understood. We would likely have to go to a 6-period day if we need to cut 20 to 30 teachers. And here's the problem with the 6-period day. Students in most years would take math, science, English, social studies, and in some years health and PE. That's 5 out of the 6 classes that they could take. That leaves one elective where they have to choose German, Spanish, band, choir, vocational education like shop, home economics, business, art classes, all of the electives. They'd have the one choice for some of the years. Other years they would have 2 choices. As a result, our elective programming would be significantly diminished because we're obligated to provide these 5 courses. The electives are not obligated. And so then students would have fewer choices than the elective offerings. It'd be in the opposite direction of what we want to do with our educational plan. If you turn to the back side, there's more. We'd also be needing to reduce our academic and behavioral support, guidance counseling, and other support services. We'd also discontinue our share of paying for a school police liaison. And right now we have a great relationship with the city. They hire the officer. Ryan Sullivan works in the middle school and high school to develop relationships with kids. We pay for a portion of that cost, about 1/3. And we discontinue that if the referendum does not pass. Next row, activities and athletics. The first item on the list is to close the swimming pool. And obviously we would save on utilities, chemical costs, some personnel-related expenses, that kind of thing. That means that we would not offer swimming for middle school kids as part of the school day. It also means that without a pool, you can't have a boys and girls swimming programs either. In addition to that, we would consider reducing 4 to 6 other sports as well. On top of that, because we're looking really throughout the district, we know we have to make cuts in every area. We'd also have to eliminate 1/2 of our academic extracurricular programs. We have not identified any of the sports or any of the extracurricular programs except for swimming because we'd be closing the pool. So I can't say what sports or activities those would be, but we realize that we'd have to make reductions in those areas as well. And then finally, the last row, I call it other. I thought, should it be other or miscellaneous? Neither one is appropriate because these are not just small items that we put together in one row. They're not. First item listed there would be for the school board to consider closing the Tower View Alternative Learning Center. We have a program for kids 16 to 18 years old, for kids who prefer a non-traditional setting instead of the regular high school experience. They go out to Tower View, beautiful setting, great teachers, a very effective program, but we would need to consider closing that. And then we're hoping and praying that those kids, at least many of those kids, would come back to the high school. Unfortunately, though, we also anticipate that some would drop out of school. Next bullet, we would move our preschool programming, very likely anyway, out of the Colville Family Center into other school sites. So we'd maintain our preschool programming. That wouldn't change because we have a different funding source for it. But we would mothball the Colville Family Center to save on utilities, custodial costs, copy machine costs, and all those kinds of things. I've been asked, how in the world can you move all that preschool programming out of Colville? You don't have enough space. Well, the simple fact, though, is that if we have to reduce 20 to 30 teaching positions, we'll have classroom space available throughout the district. And so there would be enough space to move the preschool programming. I hate to be that blunt, but I need to answer some of those questions that I've been hearing. In addition to that, we would need to increase our lunch prices as well as the fees that we charge other groups for using our facilities. That would include community education classes, booster club use of our athletic fields and gym space, those kinds of things. Next item would impact a segment of our population, but it would really impact them. You know, right now our kindergarten through fourth graders have a 1-mile walking zone. So if they live at least a mile away from school, we provide bus transportation. Middle schoolers have a 1.5-mile walking zone. This would be one area that we would have to reduce. And so we would implement the 2-mile walking zone for all kids, including our youngest learners at Sunnyside School. I've been asked, well, you know, why are you doing that? You know, why are you targeting that? And the simple fact is that it's a non-instructional area, and so we'd also need to look at changing our transportation system as well. And the final item there is we would reduce our nighttime custodial staff, which would result in cleaning every other day instead of the everyday schedule that we currently have. So in a nutshell, those are the clear choices that we have on November 6th. If both questions pass, if just the first one passes, and then if question 1 does not pass. Now, I've talked about the educational impact. There's also a financial impact, and we understand that for everyone in our town. The estimated impact for the owner of a median-priced home in the school district, which happens to be $168,900 for next year's taxes. So we've already included the valuation increases that we're all experiencing. The tax impact, approximate tax impact, would be $11.35 a month if question 1 passes. If both pass, it's another $7.32 per month. So it's just under $19 per month if both questions pass. One thing I really want to point out, it's really important, is that with an operating levy referendum, owners of ag land will pay taxes on the house, the garage, and surrounding 1 acre of land. They don't have to pay taxes on all of their land. And that is critically important to anyone who owns ag property. Now, it's very simple for me to say that. I know it's very complicated in terms of classifications, like you have hunting land and recreational land and ag property and that kind of stuff. But we encourage anyone who owns ag property, if you have any questions, to contact our financial advisor. And you can get I'll explain how to get that information here in a little bit. And they can help step you through the actual tax calculations for a piece of property. But again, for ag owners, house, garage, and 1 acre, surrounding 1 acre of land. Well, at the very bottom there, link to the property tax calculator is found at wingerssoar.org. 2 S's there, wingerssoar.org. Has a whole bunch of information about the referendum, including a link to our property tax calculator. These are our obligations as we put the referendum out for a vote. You know, my goal is to explain fair and factual information, to outline the choices that voters have on November 6th, and then encourage everyone to vote. And hopefully they walk into the poll as an informed voter. You know, the handout that I have also has my contact information. We encourage everyone to contact me with questions or comments about the referendum or any other school-related issue. And I see my time is slowly slipping by, and so I think I better open it up for questions.
We do have one question, and it is, tell us more about the escalating costs in the district's operating budget.
Yeah, and that's an important question. Why are there escalating costs? And you know, as I said earlier, there are 2 really significant factors for those increasing costs. First of all would be the transportation increases. And I believe over a 10-year period, our transportation increases have increased by $600,000 or $800,000. In the other escalating cost would be in special education, and that's increased, the unreimbursed cost has increased by $1.4 million over the last 10 years. So those are the biggest drivers. We also have inflationary costs like other folks do, but those are the two areas that really stand out in Red Wing.
That does complete the questions that were sent in.
Can we get more questions, or?
Yes?
Okay. Bring them on in.
I don't know. We will take questions from the floor. If there are any questions from the floor, please feel free to raise your hand. Go ahead, in the back row.
It's probably clear here, but maybe not in my mind, that 1867 estimated if both pass on that valuation, does that then include that $300 increase and the referendum that's being replaced, or the money that's being replaced? It includes everything?
Correct. And thank you for that question. We didn't have to include that tax increase in our estimates, but we chose to because we didn't want people to think that we're trying to hide something. And so the $18.67 per month of additional tax burden includes the $300 board-approved levy as well as the increase in this voter-approved levy. Yeah, we wanted to be forthright and transparent with the public.
Was there one more question from the floor? And then I do have some cards. Sir, go ahead.
I just had a question. What was the thinking in putting the arts in the STEM program?
Yeah, when I first came to Red Wing, I always talked about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. But the more I explored the issue, I appreciated even more the importance of art, especially in terms of design for even manufacturing companies and other entities. And so that's the educational reason for doing it. There's also a Red Wing reason for doing it. We have a strong arts program throughout the community. You see it at the Anderson Center, Red Wing Arts, Artreach, you name it. And it's a really important part of our community. And so we want to highlight all of those areas. Fall Festival this weekend, by the way. Make sure that you spend time on Saturday and Sunday.
This question is, in retrospect, do you think it was wise to build the large facility near the school for special education, especially with all the financial concerns related to reimbursement from the state and federal level for those services and declining enrollment?
I'm glad that question was asked. The question has to do with the River Bluff Educational Center, which is a building on our high school campus. We don't own that building. Red Wing Schools does not own it by ourselves. We are one of 6 member school districts that decided to take 3 or 4 different sites throughout the county and combine them into one site. Undoubtedly, it was the right thing to do. No question about it. One of the programs that we used to have was at the Jefferson School. It doesn't even have an elevator, and yet we were providing services for special ed kids in a building without an elevator and without some of the other basic features of a building that we need. It's actually very cost effective overall. I know it doesn't seem intuitive that it would be, but because of the location of the River Bluff Educational Center, we were able to bring in or to lure Lake City into the cooperative. And so by adding that other school, adding that other tax base, we were actually able to spread our costs more broadly. And then also, simple fact, when you take 3 or 4 different sites and combine them into one, there are efficiencies built with that as well. So no doubt it was the right thing to do. I know perceptually there may be some questions, but I have no doubt that that was the right thing.
What are your plans or ideas to provide mental health support?
First and foremost, we want to continue pursuing state grants for any mental health support that we can possibly get. The biggest challenge, besides the funding, is finding qualified people to do the work. So as we get grants, or if we have some additional funding through the referendum, we're going to have to decide if we can hire them ourselves or if we need to contract with Fernbrook, another entity, or the county to provide those services. But the simple fact is that we have kids with significant mental health needs. Providing the support's not only good for them, but it's also good for the whole school community. You know, it's the right thing to do.
With the additional funds, will the students at the middle school have a playground area instead of standing against the wall for their breaks?
You know, I've often wondered how we can corral all those 600 kids with raging hormones, you know, by 3 doors on the sidewalks at the middle school. You know, anything with playgrounds or other facilities is paid for out of a different source of funds. So we have funding for operating capital and deferred maintenance. Unfortunately, you know, those funds are committed for the next several years on repairs, maintenance, and other operating capital expenditures. So adding a playground is not part of the plan. However, we have ingenious people in this town who are hardworking and passionate about living outdoors and being active. And I know there's a group of Sunnyside teachers who are actively raising money for a playground at Sunnyside. And so anything is possible, but this referendum does not include money for a middle school playground.
Would you be open to having an advisory committee to oversee the workings of the school board and the general student-teacher body?
Well, I think the school board serves in that capacity. The school board makes the final decisions of the school district. I assist the school board, but really the school board, you know, is already responsible for that. But in a different way, we want to involve more community members in the decision-making processes. I said earlier with the career pathways that we want each career area to have an advisory group made up of local businesses, representatives from the local college, and others. In addition to that, we're forming a steering committee that will oversee the whole career readiness framework, and that will primarily be community members. In my mind, that's actually the most important part of the decision-making process for our educational plan would be in those particular areas. And they'll be emphasizing community members. In addition, we welcome anyone to come to one of our school board committee meetings where a lot of this stuff is discussed. We hear feedback from the public. We listen to the feedback and we make changes in what happens because of that feedback. So we encourage everyone to come to those meetings because we value community input.
What are your plans for alternatives to suspension?
Yeah, on page 2, under questions 1 and 2, you know, kind of at the top, there's a reference to providing additional resources to manage discipline and enhance student behavior. Then it does talk about social and emotional learning strategies as well as implementing alternatives to suspension. So I think that's what the purpose of that question is. We've done some things this year that we want to continue. Last year was a hard year in a lot of areas through the district in terms of student discipline and school climate. And I want to say that by far and away, our kids are well behaved. Things go really well in our school district. And I've told this to others, you know, when I leave the high school at 2:40, which is usually a mistake because it's so busy, but when I leave at 2:40, I still see the high school kids taking turns as they leave the parking lot. I mean, that's the Red Wing way. I'm very proud of our student behavior. But for various reasons, last year was a more challenging year. So we took that seriously, and this year we made some really positive changes. We made changes in some of our policies, such as not allowing kids to have cell phones during instructional time. We don't allow them to take backpacks, sometimes with contraband, into the classroom. We've really tightened our attendance policies and that kind of thing. So we've done some policy changes. We also added school home liaison. Richard Torres is the one who is working with 20 to 25 kids at the high school who have some significant attendance and discipline needs. And so even this summer, you reached out to those kids and their parents to form those relationships to help them better succeed in school this year. We want to continue that by passing questions 1 and 2 this November. That's one example of a proactive approach. There are also certain activities like restorative justice that is a different way of dealing with discipline. So instead of just coming down hard with a consequence, there are ways to work in smaller groups of people so that people understand the consequences of their actions. That's also proven to be very effective. We have not yet decided on pursuing that approach, but that would be one example that we would consider. You know, the next step if both questions 1 and 2 pass would be look at the overall landscape and choose what makes most sense for us in a cost-effective way.
How and why have transportation costs increased so much?
Yeah, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think it's worth reaffirming. First of all, the geography of our district is very complicated. Just yesterday, actually, I was driving up by Wild Turkey Road, you know, up by the winery, because there was some questions about transportation. So I was driving around, I'm sitting there thinking, well, no wonder transportation costs so much, because I'm going up this windy road between bluffs, you know, picking up a small number of kids. So definitely the geography plays a big factor. Also, we're pretty large compared to our neighboring districts, yet we're not a big metro area. And that actually makes it more challenging to encourage bus companies to bid on our transportation routes. So this last time around, we had one bidder. They provide good service to the school district, but clearly that plays a factor as well. And then finally, another important reason has to do with driver shortage and all the help wanted signs. That bus company had to provide more competitive wages in order to ensure that they had enough drivers. We all want enough drivers to get the kids to school, and there's a cost factor there as well.
That completes the questions we have. And Heidi, did you want to do a wrap-up with Karsten?
Yeah, I'm for the transition here, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Anderson. We are going to take a break, and about 7 o'clock we're going to start our school board candidate forum. Now would be a good time for you to fill out those question cards and get those submitted. To any of the ladies wearing a tag of any kind will help you get those pieces. I hope you've heard a lot. I think Superintendent Anderson explains this really well. I appreciate the questions. This is not an easy decision. I do want to testify just personally that in one of my jobs, I wear an education hat outside of this community too. I serve as a director of Minnesota School Boards Association. One of my new jobs this year was to review 29 applicants for an innovation award. I did that Tuesday, had a conference call this morning. When we talk about career pathways here and implementing that in our high school, we are not far behind on the cutting edge of that work. There are 5, I think, different high schools that are doing that kind of work, applying for an innovation grant. So I think, you know, we've got some good work, groundwork laid, and we've got some work ahead of us to do. But Red Wing is really looking for those solutions for our kids. So thank you for coming. I hope you're staying in the seats for the candidate forum. We have some more people coming in too. So thank you very much. And we'll start again at 7 o'clock.